When Seth quit reading, Braden leans over and he goes, he didn't even get to the end of the story. And it gave me an opportunity to whisper to him, that's the point. That's why I chose to stop the reading there. This is one of those stories that when we teach our kids in Bible class, we're rushing to David killed Goliath. That's not the point of the story. As cool as it is, that's not the point of the story. Let's walk through this for a few minutes and then we're going to make some observations. Saul and his army line up in battle array. Common to their day, we're on this side and you're on that side, and we square off and we holler back and forth at each other for a while. And finally the proposal is made that we'll send our champion and you send yours. They can fight one-on-one, winner take all. And the Philistines' champion is Goliath. 6 cubits in a span, 9 feet and the width of your hand based on the king. So he's somewhere between 9'6" and 9'9". What? Sheet of paneling's 8 foot long. So even standing on the stage, I'm not reaching 9'9". I had a friend a few years ago who was 7'1" and 3/4. Be dwarfed by Goliath. And David is what? He is a shepherd boy. Boy being the key word. Everybody looks at him that way. They recognize that he's nothing special. He's good looking. He's probably straight out of the field with a sun glow on his face. And he's an average teenage boy. In Israel in those days, he's what? 5'8", 5'7". They're not known for being giants in Israel. My granddad was straight from that part of the world, and he was about 5'6½". David walks into camp and he can smell the fear. Hardened soldiers who quake at the sight of this monster of a man stepping onto the battlefield. He's carrying equipment that outweighs David. He has his own shield bearer. He carries a weaver's beam. And David says, I've got this. And his brothers laugh at him. His brother's friends are amused at the little kid who's shown up on the battlefield. And the rumor begins to spread, and it gets to Saul's tent. Saul's like, hey, maybe we found our champion, bring him in. And the hobbit walks in. And Saul's like, you got to be kidding me. This is what you send me for a champion? David, he'll eat you. You're a snack to him. And listen to what David says. This is why I chose the reading I chose. Verse 17, after saying, look, I've killed a lion, I've killed a bear. This is like one of them because number one, I'm fighting God's battle. I'm defending God. Verse 36. But verse 37. The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, He will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. That's the point. That's the point of the whole story. It's not about David. It's about God. You hear sports figures who want to use the David versus Goliath in the underdog and the favorite in a Super Bowl. It's got nothing to, it's not about the size of Goliath and the size of David. It's about the size of God. It has nothing to do with these other characters. David's just the one with the faith. If Saul had said the same thing, it would have still been about God, but Saul would have gotten to walk on the battlefield. If one of David's brothers had said the same thing, it still would have been about God, but they could have walked out there as grown men defending God. It just took the faith of this young man. And what sent me down the road thinking about this was a song that Keith Lancaster wrote several years ago. And it's titled, "Get to the Point." And it starts out, and the singer is describing his life. And he's talking about the fact that he was kind of minding his own business. He was just kind of muddling through life. And then he picked up one of the Apostle Paul's letters. And he was reading it, and he kept saying to Paul, "Get to the point." And Paul was saying, "I'm trying to get to the point." And ultimately, the punchline is, it's not about me. Paul says it's not about me, it's about what God's doing for me. All the changes that they're seeing in the book of Acts, where he goes from Saul of Tarsus to Paul, when he goes from persecutor to preacher, it's not about Paul. It's about what God was doing through him. And so the song goes on, and finally the reader begins to see the speaker begins to see the change in himself. And other people see it. And so they start asking the question. And he's telling his story, and the friend interrupts, "Get to the point." And he says, "I'm trying to get to the point. It's what you're seeing, the changes in me, is not about me. The changes you're seeing are about what God is doing for me. It's what God is doing in me. It's what God is doing through me." And so I want us to think about that mindset as we rush into this year, realizing how far we're already into 2024, with this theme that it's all about the glory of God. And I said last week, what? We have to live like that light on a hill so that people ask, that we give them something to talk about. But if we give someone something to talk about, and they ask the question about the change in our lives, or the success that the church is having, or the things that God is doing in this world, Peter says we have to have an answer. We have to be able to explain to them that it's not me. It's not Mount Carmel. It's not anything I'm doing, but it's what God is doing. So I want you to read a couple of verses with me from the New Testament. We've seen this one, by the way, in verse 46, when David goes on the battlefield. Again, it's about God. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, or into our hands. David knows. And yeah, at the end of the story, David wins, because God wins. But it's kind of like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Even if it hadn't ended that way, the faith that made it about God in the beginning still makes it the point of the story. But flip over to the New Testament. 2 Corinthians chapter 12. We mentioned Paul because of the song, so let's look at him again. Paul opens 2 Corinthians 12 so that you understand the context, discussing a vision or a trip he took. It's so real, he's really not even sure how to describe it. But then he goes on to say that because of the things that I have seen in my life, because of the things that God has done through me and in me and for me, there was a danger of my head getting a little too big to fit through the door. So I was given a thorn in the flesh to remind me that it's not about me. All right, so he goes to God. 3 times, he says in verse 8, I begged him, I entreated, I got on my knees before the God of heaven, and I asked him to take this away from me. And the answer came back to me, my grace is sufficient for you. Power is perfected in weakness. Paul, you're going to keep your thorn in the flesh because you have to remember this has nothing to do with you. The power is me, and you're the weakness. And you know what? Paul says, all right, I'm good with that. We'll go with that for the rest of my life. God's doing amazing things through the Apostle Paul. We see the travels in the book of Acts. We see the churches popping up all over the place. We call it a coaching tree in college or the NFL. We see the missionary tree coming off of Paul with Timothy and Titus. And yet Paul says, you know what? I'm the weak one in this relationship. God's the power. God's the source. And so 3 other verses that I want you to connect tonight. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 10. Depending on your translation, it's very likely that this does not come through in English. And so you'll want to make a note maybe in your margin. Ephesians 6 and verse 10 says, finally be strong in the Lord. The word there is in the passive. Doesn't translate well in English, or a lot. A lot of times we get it confused with the middle voice, and so we just kind of leave it. What that text literally says is, be made strong by the power of His might. Paul said, when you're getting ready to go to battle against Satan, and you're putting on your armor, the strength that you have is coming from another source. You are being strengthened by the power that God is allowing you to have directly from Him. Doesn't have anything to do with you. Now then, do I have to allow Him to make me strong? Absolutely. Do I have to put on the armor? Do I have to enlist? Do I have to be willing to step out into the battle? Without a doubt. But I'm doing so with the understanding that He's powering me. I'm not powering up. I'm not taking an extra vitamin. He's doing it. He's strengthening me. 2 Corinthians chapter 16, verse 13. And that's nowhere near right. There's not that many chapters there, excuse me. It's supposed to say 1 Corinthians. See, Chad, it happens. Sometimes it's the wrong book. Sometimes it doesn't even exist. I've stood up here before for 30 seconds looking for something that's in 1 Peter when it's supposed to be in 2 Peter. So, nowhere. Be on the alert. 1 Corinthians 16:13. Stand firm in the faith. Act like men. Then yours probably says what mine says. Be strong. It's a different Greek word for strength, but it's still passive. Paul literally writes, be made strong. And the passive means somebody else is doing it. You're not being made strong on your own. You're being acted upon by someone else. Now, the same word that's in Ephesians 6 and verse 10 Also appears in 2 Timothy 2 and verse 1. There it's singular. It's a direct reference to Paul writing to Timothy. But again, be made strong. So let's go back and let's tie this to what I said at the start. We're trying this year to let our light shine. And Lloyd chose that song because when he came to me and asked for a theme, I told him and he goes, give me song selections. I said, this little light of mine. And I never thought he'd run with it. But hey, that's exactly it. We're going to let our light shine so that they glorify God. But then when the world sees it, hopefully they're going to ask. In 1 Peter 3 and verse 15, we have to have an answer. I need to be able to explain to the people I meet the difference that He has made in my life, the change that they have seen. I need to be able to explain how He is working through us at Mount Carmel to His glory, so that they understand not only is the end result about His glory, but the process of getting there is about His glory. And when I do that, when I allow Him to work in me and through me, then I get to realize what He's doing for me. That's when, as we talked about recently, that glory to glory, I get a little bit of that reflected glory because of what He's doing for me. So this year, let's get to the point. Let's not shy away from letting our world know what He's doing. What He's doing in us, what He's doing through us, what He's doing for us. And if no one asks, let me give you a hint from the writings of Paul. I'll give you a hint from Paul's work in Acts. If we're putting the glory on God, there's nothing wrong with us bringing it up and saying, this is what God's doing. Isn't that what Paul did? Didn't he go back to Jerusalem and said, this is what's happening among the Gentiles? It's not about me, it's about God, but this is what's happening. Didn't he say it in nearly every letter he wrote? Your name is spread all over the world to the glory of God. Did he not write in nearly every letter, this is where I've been and this is what I've done to the glory of God? Maybe that the world doesn't know to ask. So it's okay for us to brag on our God. It's okay for us to point at Him and say, hey, you need to see this. Maybe that you're at some point in your life right now where you really need to be made strong. Where you're right in the heat of battle, but the reliance just hasn't been there yet. You haven't put all the faith in Him to handle the battle. Maybe you need prayers. Maybe you need to recommit. Maybe you need to obey the gospel so that He can empower you. If there's any of those needs in your life tonight, please come as we stand and sing.